Whakarongo ki te hae manu e kāranga nei. Tui tuia. Tuia ki ringa, ki raro, ki waho, ki roto. Tuia te heringa tangata. Ti hei uiuri, ti hei naku, ti hei maureora. Tūturu whakamaua kia tina. Haumie hui hae. Ina mana, ina reo, ina rangatiratanga. Nei te mihi kia koutou. Nau mai ki tēnei kaupapa, ko te kaupapa whakaherehera i te tiriti o Waitangi, kei raro tō koutou korowai. Korowai manaaki, korowai aroha ki ngā tangata whaikaha. Te mihi tuarua ki ngā mana no te whenua nei, ki ngā tauhuriri. Anei te mihi kia koe o tu hoki i kare, e tuahine. Kia koutou, ko tai mai tātou, ki tēnei hui, e hui ana, ki te ruki tēnei kaupapa, ko te kaupapa tino hohonu, he wero tērā kia koutou, hea te mea kia mau, ki tō nākau, hea te mea nui. Hea te mea nui, ki te ao, he tangata. Nō reira i te whānau, whakatau mai kei raro i tēnei tuarara, i tēnei korowai aroha ki ngā tangata. Kia ora kōwai au, heorea hau no Ngāti Kawa, Ngāti Hini, Ngāti Rāhiri, Ngā Puhi, i te tāu tōku papa, i te tāu tōku mama, i whana mai ia ki Otipoti, Ngāti Pākehā ia, I tūpua ki au ki reira. Nā reira. Oku wawe e rua ki tēnei taha, ki tērā taha, he tēnei taha Māori, ko tērā taha ko te taha Pākehā. Nā reira. Ko wai au, ko te Marama tōku inga. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. So, thank you. That's just a wee mihi to you all. Thank you for taking the time to come here. I led off initially with a karakia that we've developed for BAT, Burwood of Academy Trust, shifting away from Burwood Academy of Independent Living, and we were beautifully gifted that taonga, Ha I Mano, from Whai Tere here and Whai Mere Higgs. So Ha I Mano is about the Ha is our breath, I Mano is the many or the thousands, so it's about listening to all of the kōrero that is being said by our people, okay, that who we are all supporting tangata whaikaha. And part of that mihi that I led off with was about acknowledging obviously who's under this roof, that is you all, who we are supporting, but also where the mana resides. And that is with Ngāi Tuahuriri and to our lovely tuahine here, Kate, who has whakapapa to many spaces and places here in Te Waikaunenga. And it's just something that we need to acknowledge, that this land that we stand on has whakapapa, as we all do, and that's pretty much part of the conversation today, is about how do we connect all of that up so that we actually understand what a partnership may look like. So, can I just touch on that? Yeah. Oh. Yep. So, that's our karakia. So, as talking about in there, so obviously listening to the many voices, but also asking us to connect to the knowledge that is around us. So, from above, Mātauranga Māori, we understand that our knowledge comes from higher places, from our ancestors, and we stand on their shoulders. We understand that we've got Papatuanuku, ki raro, that's who we have our resources, that's where we exist, who actually feeds us, through to ki waho, to our communities, ki roto, what I bring to this space. And it's understanding in Te Tiriti that those are our descendants from here. We're actually standing on the shoulders of our descendants because we want to make this place sustainable, effectively, for them to thrive. And then we adorn ourselves with their treasures. okay? And Te Hei Maureora goes straight back to one of our narratives of where we came from Tani Mahuta through to Hini Te Onioni, who was the first maiden. And the breath of life, Te Hei Maureora, says it sneeze of life, is the first hongi that he imparted on her to give her life. And so all of that's really trying to make sure this fits in 10 minutes. This was a brain dump. This was a brain dump that I sent through to these amazing waitangi tour to Rochelle and Kate, and I said, this is some thinking about what we can talk about for me for my 10 minutes, and I'm going, yeah, no. So really there's one thing up there, the allied statement. I do this with my students at Ara within the Haora space, is that before we go anywhere, I want you to explore your allied statement. What is that? What will that look like for someone coming into that space? How am I going to effectively work in partnership with whānau Māori on their land? Okay. And so I put that out there as a challenge, a wero. As I said, anei te puna hohonu, so this is a really big, deep spring that we're going to be diving into, because we're only going to be looking at the ripple at the moment, the impact that we're creating as we move through. So we want to make sure that's actually a really positive impact as well. So understanding your allied statement. And then what we're going to do from there is just move past that and look at some of the practicalities of the space, the tirohanga Māori, so Māori world perspective, and how we actually practice in this space. And I'm not a clinical expert. I'm very much wearing short shorts, regaining my whakapapa. So I'm just providing an insight. And knowing that these ways of working, pōwhiri model, meihana model, hui model, the hui process, te whiki and so forth, te whare tapa whā, have amazing amounts of knowledge embedded in there. It's a process, but first and foremost we have to start understanding the knowledge that's informing it too. Then we can look at things like manaakitanga. We hear that everywhere, hospitality. But what does that actually mean? Mana aki tanga. Mana, the authority of a person, how I'm going to lift it up. And we can do that through hospitality, but actually that's quite a big concept. And throughout there, whanaungatanga is one of the key aspects in there, whakawhanaungatanga, building relationships. And so we actually, hands up who knows the pōwhiri model of engagement and who actually applies some of that process to the way that they work.
I would challenge, I think most of you do, you just don't know it in our terms.
Yeah. And that, for me, I'm just going to put it out there, that's actually really concerning because we live in a bicultural space that is actually led by Te Tiriti Waitangi. We all, part of our learnings, I suspect when we've gone to those tertiary higher learning places, this should be embedded. So that's actually quite a telling point for me. So if we don't know some of the reo Māori words around it, that's okay. But it's actually acknowledging in ourselves how we naturally work through that space. So Kate is correct in that we mostly do it. However, we need to start to identify what that might mean for our tangata whaikaha, our people that we're working with. So what that understanding then? So pōwhiri, hands up who've gone through a pōwhiri process. Okay. Some people haven't. So if you haven't, have a kōrero or have a conversation with a colleague that has, and just ask them for what they experienced in that process. Ask what actually was occurring for them. So did they feel the emotion that was attached to that space? And what was it that following the whole process, what was the outcome for them being in that space? Most likely initially a bit of fear. Moving into, that's going to be the moving through to the karanga, which you've been called on to that space. Bit of fear, apprehension, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing what are the rules of engagement in this space. Through to then being sat, having someone speak for you. Okay, and so in that space, you're the manuhiri, you're the visitor. Okay, it's going to be supported and managed by Tāngata whenua. So that whole place there, that's the whaikaha, that's the interaction of engagement. Okay, that's them. That's you getting to know their rules and ways of doing things, and you're going to be putting in your case there. Following all of that space, which is held by one of our kaitiaki tūmātauinga, it's bound by ways of doing things. Through to following that process where there's a common understanding, or meeting together of two worlds, then we'll go and hongi. Okay? And that hongi is actually the intimate connection of going, actually, I understand you, you understand me. Now we've made a pact, a treaty, we've signed the contract. It's not about this, it's about this. And this creates vulnerability. So the core thing in that space with vulnerability, you need to have a relationship. And so following that relationship, you then can share kai. Okay? And that's about actually now, let's get into the mahi. We've actually gotten to know each other, now we're going to sit here and we're going to actually be together. And from that point is when you can start doing the work, and that's the kaupapa. Following that point there, after doing the kaupapa and there's sort of, you've done what you need to do as clinicians with that person, then you can do the finishing off, or the whakakapi, closing of the process, and that is actually reflecting back what you've heard. Okay, this is the role that I see myself taking here, and I hear that this is what your need is. Okay, this is what I can do. There's a common understanding, and both of you can say, yes, no, I understand, or I need some clarification. And then from there, you move on. So that whole process, I kind of naturally went from you being the visitor through to you being the professional. Okay? So understand that actually you are the visitor when you're interacting with the person in front of you. You're visiting their lives. Okay? Until you open yourself up in that vulnerable space where they actually have some rules of engagement that you can work coherently with, then you'll start to be able to move together as a unit. And also thinking that one last point is that also in that whole porphyry process, if you've experienced a porphyry, that nervousness that you most probably have, uncertainty you most probably had, consider your patients, your people you're connecting in with also, they will be feeling that too at one stage, maybe moving into this kind of space here as well. So how do I navigate them through that? How do I create that relationship? And the porphyry model, or the hui process, which is a slightly more condensed version, will actually support that. I'm well past my 10 minutes, I suspect. So so the whittle on that, so ko takato te manuka. So when you see people placing the whittle at the taki at a porphyry, they're placing down the challenge. Okay, it's your choice to pick it up. So that's from that point of if. When I ask who understands the porphyry model, or heard about the porphyry model, or used porphyry model, there's no hands going up. That's my challenge to you, is actually dig into some of that, understand some of that, so that you can gain some of the higher knowledge to apply to this space, so then you can actually start to understand how to create a relationship at the table of Tāngata whenua and mana whenua. So then you can actually start saying, I've got a true partnership here and a treaty-based relationship. Nā reira te whānau, I'll leave that there, and I hope the rest of this is informative for you, and kia ora.
Kia ora whānau, ngā mihi to my tuakana, and for the opening being where I whangaid, so when he talks about mana whenua, I also look to the strength of Te Ao Marama in a sibling relationship. As to, I'd just like to mihi to Rachelle, who stands with us in a true Tiriti Partnership today. She's here with mana whenua and Tāngata whenua to deliver something that's close to my heart, definitely. And a mihi to the Back Trust for giving us space to be us, and I'm proud to be the Flex lead in this amazing trust that grows every time I'm part of it. Every week we do something different to honour Tiriti. So I'll probably come back to this amazing slide but first of all, ko ai au. Ko aura te maka, ko Waitangi te awa, ko Naitu Ahuriri te tikuna, ko Hakere te tikuna, ko Te kahu, rātou, ko Hakere, ko Price, ko Sutherwood, ko Mortruce, ko Folk, ko Morris, toko whānau. Ko Ototahi Aho, ko Cate Rachelle. So I stand here also privileged on, well, the privilege that's been bestowed on me. And they are here behind me because these are my why. Behind me is my whakapapa. You might hear in clinician world it's in your blood. Recently, when I say recently, the last 30 or 40 years, there's DNA. I stand before you because of their DNA. All of them have brought to the table who I am today. But likewise, as I look around the room, you have your own whakapapa. You have your own tikuna. You didn't get here from any other way than those that stand behind you. I'm also proud to be Plex, so in front of me and beside me, I represent Tāngata whaikaha Māori, but also Tāngata whaiora Māori, as well as disabled people in the Plex community. I positively manage now, when I say now, I didn't always, 12 chronic health conditions. That mean that I've at times been in a wheelchair, at times I've been on crutches today again, and I really don't share that story to clinicians because I want any support or help, even though there's some amazing wahine in the room that have done that journey. It's to say that I'm also Māori, I'm also Plex, but if you saw me having a coffee, maybe you wouldn't know that. And that's really important to me to share for clinicians, that when we come and sit at a table, we bring everything of us, but you bring everything of yours. If we do go back to here, if we do this pōwhiri model, as Te Ao Marama spoke of, and I challenged you that you're already doing it, good practice looks like for a Plex Māori who may not look your model that you've learnt, to prepare, to read notes perhaps, to have a look at what the conditions are and what may have gone before. LCR 4406 has a stack of papers, and when I walk into rooms, I assume that you might have read my whakapapa, because I've assumed that because I've read about who I'm coming to see. I then start to establish relationships, and I come aware that you work for a DHB that's under pressure. Or if you're not at this DHB, you're going to be under pressure because you're not here because Nans are telling me to say it. I want to mihi to all of you. You've chosen professions because you have humanity, that you have heart, and you have a whakapapa. And even though I'm a patient and I'm asking for your wisdom and your support, you are doing that as a human being first and foremost. You are clinicians, yes, but you are human beings with a whakapapa. So we can establish relationships very quickly. You don't need a cost centre to do that, and hopefully I kind of just did that now. I didn't have to go around every single one of you. I'm trying to engage to say, hey, I really am grateful for what wisdom that you share with me. It doesn't take any longer appointment. I didn't need to take a double hour, even though Te Ao Marama wanted to make this a half-day workshop.
Still do.
You can sign up later. That partnership has occurred very, very quickly by tone, by acknowledging, by preparing and establishing. And then we bring in a clinical sense of going to come with an issue. I may come with 100, and that's not fair when the patients do that. So we also need to make sure that we're establishing some groundwork. We've identified some issues. Then we can together assess them. Because I am the chief of my own waka, just as you are the chief of the knowledge in that waka. You'll see in a moment what I mean. We can analyse all of that just in that 10 to 15 minute consult. We can implement an action plan as a partnership. We can decide what's good for me, but also what's going to work for you to impart your wisdom and everything that you want to bring to the table when you join the profession in a really short space. And we can effectively close so that you are mana enhanced and I am mana enhanced. What I mean by that is that relationship has been a great part of your day. Because if we lay these foundations down, I leave raving about you so you have a wait list so long you wonder where it came from, and you go home at night with a good news story because actually that was fabulous, that session. You felt listened to and felt that your wisdom was being heard, and I felt heard and got to apply that wisdom straight away. Papa? To me, that's what treaty is in a clinical sense. that's what this whole space was about today, to say that you can do it now. And that then that is a whittle that you can start to learn more about the Tiriti and all of the articles and the deep knowledge underneath that. But today, this afternoon, if you leave here and see one person who identifies as Māori in their notes or in their LC in their hospital number, maybe just ask a different question. So to me, my whakatauki is one that we've heard a lot, I waka, eke noa. However, do you understand that? For me, the part is the waka. We often say we're all in it together, but this waka to me is my life, as Te Ao Marama alluded to. You have a privilege to join people's lives when you're supporting patients. And in that, we offer you one seat on that waka. However, if we don't all row together and we don't all go together, the waka will go off in a really challenging direction and we'll probably end up in a storm. We may even be in a tornado and we'll all fall out. But if we take the time in the pōwhiri process and continue to, if you get a seat at my waka, you can continue to come along with me on that waka. If we're paddling in unison with everything else I bring, your wisdom is needed. Your years of knowledge needs to be in my waka, or I won't get access to the biomedical treatment so I can stand. I won't get the physio appointments that are so desperately important to me to keep me moving and keep me standing today. I won't get access to specialist treatments, to the surgeries that allow me to breathe, to mea, to mea, to mea. So please, please, join me in my waka, but honour the seat that I've offered. And by doing that, you're establishing Tiriti Partnership. You are already, and we don't need to converse in a Māori language, although kia ora is nice, and although the sayings and the language is very important. But think about what you bring. To me, the po, and I have stolen this from my own organisation because I wear many potai, we have po here that look like values that I also believe you all bring. Kotahitanga, tuhura, tiaki is care, whanaungatanga, which we've spoken about, and manakitanga. To me, hospitality is not about having a beer at the pub. That's good, wine's good too. However, it's about just being together and sharing and making each other feel welcome. Partnership, that is a word that's being thrown around a lot. But partnership is just as if you have a partnership with anyone. We have partners in life, we have partnerships, relationships with other people outside. Use the word as it was intended in this space, to be a partner. You come, I come, let's go on my waka together. Some days I might be able to be in your waka and I'll be privileged to have a seat too. But yeah, that is my kōrero around partnership. I lay the whittle for you to go out and do this afternoon, but also know that we are here as allies of you. I am mana whenua and I'm proudly to be mana whenua, but I'm also proud to be of all of my Vautrus background, the Rotterdam, the English, and I'm proud to live and stand in this space. So don't be a stranger. If you're stuck about Tiriti stuff or you need something, that's what Bao's about education. I'm a plex. Please do not hesitate to ask us a question. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Oh, and I'll introduce this amazing partnership by Hene. Rachelle.
Gosh, he uri a hou ngā tāwhiti, ka miha ho ki tēnai whenua me una uri, ko Rachelle tupu ingoa. That's me just saying that I come from distant lands. I am not Tāngata whenua. I'm attempting though to become Tāngata Te Tiriti. I'm attempting to understand what does it mean to make progress towards being a person who works in honouring the treaty. One thing that I have picked up from what you, Cate and Te Ao Marama, has shared this morning is the privilege of being invited as guests into people's lives. What an amazing privilege that is, and how tender is that invitation, and how much should we stop and think about our own. I am challenged to always think about, if I see myself as an expert, if I see myself as having power, if I see myself as telling that person what to do and gaining their compliance, I'm not a guest. I'm not a guest in their lives. And so that for me is one of the challenges that I think about. So I stand here today as a person who's on a journey, and I feel very privileged to be able to work alongside and have many conversations with Cate and Ao Marama, but I am such a baby toddler in this area. So, but I thought it's helpful to understand a little bit about, I'm into coat hangers, ideas to hang ideas off, or things to hang ideas off, and I thought I'd share with you my coat hanger that I kind of use as I think about next steps that I want to take in my journey. You know, I've already mentioned this, but there's an underlying value that undergirds all this, that I needed to do reading and courses and have conversations to ensure that I am deeply committed to honouring the treaty and the articles of the treaty, in the way that I work, and in the way that I think, and in the way that I speak to people, and in the way that I hear and listen to people. And so when I'm trying to work, some of the things that I'm really wanting to think about, and when I'm thinking about achieving equity and health outcomes, is I want to think about whether there's equity of access, whether there's equity of experience, and whether there's equity of outcome. Now there's many more, but I just want to focus on experience because this is what you've been talking about today. In New Zealand, we're really keen on, we treat everybody the same. It's a fairness thing. You know, we treat everybody the same. But that does not lead to equity of experience. And I'm a realist researcher, and I know that humans have human agency, and that we have emotional responses, and how we feel emotionally and psychologically in spaces, therapeutic spaces, will impact on how we are able to respond to them. If we feel distressed, anxious, afraid, overwhelmed, feel disempowered, then our response to the intervention that we're receiving will be different. So one of the things we need to focus on is ensuring equity of experience, not just everyone gets the same thing, and well, it didn't quite work for outcome, but we'll keep trying. I always use this metaphor, sorry if I've heard it before, but we often design systems that are based around pathways. We design them on the paper and we lay our concrete paths and we put them in place, but people have their own desire lines that they want to walk. This is a terminology that's used in urban architecture, desire lines. And how willing are we to go with people to explore their desire lines? Doesn't mean a complete change in map. Sometimes it means let's explore a shortcut, a different approach, a different way of doing things. Are we willing to be flexible to ensure that people have equity of experience by considering their desire lines? Then these are the big gaps that I've consider. This is my coat hanger. And I want to acknowledge Suzanne Pitama in this because I heard her speaking about the Meihana model, and it's on YouTube, and she started in this kind of way. I really encourage Suzanne's YouTube presentation for an introduction to the Meihana model. It's very accessible. But how big is the gap? What's contributing to the gap? And what steps can I take to reduce the gap? As a clinician, I think are really useful things to think of. So in general, we know there's an enormous gap for New Zealanders. So in 2013, an estimated 24% of New Zealanders reported experiencing disability, and that's going to increase by 27% by 2038. That's people reporting an impairment which functions on their day-to-day living, on their day-to-day functioning. Māori, though, have higher age-adjusted rates of disability, 32% compared to non-Māori at 24%. It's quite a big gap already. And I thought just to illustrate what you can do, this is one population, one example, but just to give you a bit of an idea. So for instance, instance, if you look at spinal cord injury, you can see that there's a significantly higher number of Māori in the orange who are having traumatic spinal cord injuries compared to non-Māori. That's an annual incidence on the left. So it's good to understand how big is the gap. They say clinical responsibility as healthcare professionals. For the population that we're working in, the health service that we're working in, what's the size of the gap that we're looking at? It's quite confronting, but I think it's our obligation professionally. And then we can dig a bit deeper, and there's often research, and this is somewhere where Blue Academy can help as well if it's something you're interested in. And librarians love helping with this sort of work, CDHB librarians. But for instance, Emma Waith and a group of researchers from Dunedin have looked at prevalence and predictors of disability for Māori 24 months after injury. And for those that were hospitalised at 24 months, the experience of disability, those who experienced disability at 24 months was 26% for Māori and only 10% for non-Māori. So this is the same health condition, but at 24 months, and apparently within New Zealand the same service, because there's only 2 units, but at 24 months there's that disparity, that gap. So then it's good to know, why is there a gap? Now it's really interesting, and this is just beside the point, but there's been some studies which have looked at incidents of cervical injuries, and so there's some work going on around what is it that's contributing to the higher rates of injury to start with. Is there differences in mechanisms of injury, or is there differences in canal size that's impacting on the types of injuries? So that's one way to go. Let's understand what's causing the gap, and let's try and reduce the incidence to start with. Another way that people have gone, again, Emma Waith has started to understand what's these longer-term disability outcomes, what's contributing to them. And the predictors, the 3 key predictors that they found was not having work for pay before their injury. So that's a proxy for economic hardship prior to injury and disparity. Experiencing disability before the injury, that's a pre-existing health condition. So complexity, dual diagnoses, and having trouble accessing health services for the injury. So even though the same is officially provided, there is differences in the experience of access. And this is backed up by some work that we did with the Bird Academy, where we evaluated the New Zealand Spinal Cord Action Plan. And one of the things we found was that at the moment the system really relies heavily on self-advocacy, and a sort of a hit and miss support of a navigator is a real issue. And seems to be contributing. So establishing mechanisms to prove access to and navigation through services for those most at risk for poor outcomes, for instance those on Ministry of Health funding, Māori, and those with dual diagnoses, is recommended. So that was also consistently found. But it's also broader than just the spinal cord injury population, because there's this paper and this paper which talk about navigation and access of services as being a significant issue for Māori and contributing to different experiences of health systems as a result. So my whenua for you is to keep up with, understand and keep up with the size of the gap. And it's quite easy to do these days. There's lots of free, you don't have to be a member of a university to be able to access some really good resources. Google Scholar's really pretty good. And I keep forgetting, it's not Medline, maybe it's PubMed, which you can have free access to that database to search, but you can, once again, get in touch with a librarian, they'll help. And keep track of papers that are really relevant to your clinical practice. You don't have to understand the whole big thing, just a little bit. And there's also a really excellent free resource that comes out regularly, the Māori Health Review, which is put out by Materi Harwood, and she overviews some of the key literature that's coming out. You can sign up to that, as well as the Rehabilitation Research Review, for instance. So what can you do about the gap? And we've talked about some of these things, but I think it's worth thinking that you can do things at lots of different levels. You can change your values by learning and listening and understanding. You can the way that you interact, the way that you do things via the pōwhiri process is hugely important. There's also interventions that can facilitate culturally safe practice because they incentivise individualisation, listening, centering the person. So, goal setting is a really simple example of an intervention that could be potentially quite useful. Occupational performance coaching with young families, for instance, is another intervention that's been developed to try and support this more individualistic approach. But there's also organisational processes that can facilitate or hinder access, experience and response. How do people get followed up? How do they hear about their appointments? Do they know how to phone someone and to ask a simple question? Do they know who to go to if there's a problem with their equipment? Do you know those systems and processes? I've just marked 35 assignments where postgrad students have interviewed 35 people about their experiences of rehabilitation. It comes through again and again and again. I didn't know what the process was, no one told me what the process was, and I didn't know what to do when it went wrong. So listening and learning is really key thing that we can do. Another thing, just a wee tip that might be helpful, is you might want to consider within your service taking a case and understanding their journey through your service and identifying where the barriers are through that they encounter and what facilitates them. So follow a person. It's a kind of a design thing that they used to do all the time with, understand the client journey for web design and all sorts of things. But it's a really useful clinical tool for us to be thinking about. Great idea for a multidisciplinary meeting with your team. Understand the Māori Health Action Plan. Learn the Mehana model. Listen to Suzanne Pitama, but also, if you can, find this journal article which at the end has exceptionally practical questions in the appendix that you can use to have a discussion that explores some of the concepts associated with Matauranga Māori and Māori understandings of health. It's a really practical tool. At Burwood Academy we looked at these numbers, this gap, and we're trying to do something about it. So that's what the Staying on Track project is all about, which Ao Marama and Susan are leading us with. We're trying to understand how could we support Māori and all people with spinal cord injury, but we're going to start with trying to understand what Māori require particularly, or aspire to or need. To improve the access to services in that first year post-stroke, post-spinal cord injury. So that's what that project is based on, and it's come out of those questions. But I just want to leave this one point, and it comes back to the pōwhiri process that you were talking about before. I read this yesterday. We can all agree, what we can all agree on is that person-centred care, which I think is what we're really talking about, is mostly nothing grand, but rather infinitely small, nimble, and cumulative through micro acts of care. We can all do micro acts of care. We can all do small, nimble things to respond to the people that we meet and that we encounter, and the people who invite us in to be guests in their waka. So so that's just a few thoughts from me of coat hangers and things that you might want to hang some ideas on. What is the time? I did my 10 minutes well and truly. Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi mai e tato tato e te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi
the Māoris in the room. Yeah, I'm still human, but
Yeah, so has anyone got any questions or thoughts or reflections? I'm just going to open up the doors so we
while we're just waiting for one, just a huge ngā mihi to you all as well. I think we're probably preaching to the converted. I look around the room and this comes up every month, and this was a new topic, and yet we have a full room. So a huge mihi to you all because you're all really coming to be partners. So yeah, can't say that enough. I'm pretty excited that there's enough of you out there to start infiltrating good Tiriti Partnership. Come on, have one. We like sticky ones, especially. Come on.
Not a question, but just an acknowledgement. Yeah, this is probably been one of the best sessions I've come to. So, yeah.
We have a
Well,
Kia ora, and I don't think the mihis go out, and that's what I mean. We're in this together, and ngā mihi to you, Alison, for being in one of those seats in my waka. It's a privilege to know that you're out there doing the great mahi that you're doing, and without you I wouldn't be standing here, and I certainly wouldn't have any mahi and have been able to do it. I would have been one of the percentage that stayed disabled. So kia ora to you and to everyone here. I'm sure if I can mahi one wahine toa that you've all done that with somebody in your practice. Yeah,
Kia ora guys, that was a really powerful presentation. I love the way each of your presentations really complemented each other's. I was just wondering if you guys had any thoughts or reflections on, in the last 50 years, we've seen the urbanisation of Māori and that disconnect between Māori and their whakapapa and their Tāngata whenua. And so now there's this intergenerational urbanisation of Māori and that disconnect, and then coming through in a clinical rehabilitation environment. You've got people who might identify as Māori but have not a lot of knowledge about their whakapapa or their way their cultural history manifests in their being in the world. As clinicians or people working with Māori in that space, how can you help them reconnect or address people that identify as Māori but maybe don't have a sort of clear understanding of their whakapapa and who they are?
Yeah, it's a common query, and sometimes to the point that actually people may not actually think they want to connect back as well. So there's also that tension too. From my perspective, I'm new to my reconnecting back to my own whakapapa, and it's really been the past 8 to 10 years I've been doing that actively. And I think what has really supported me in that space is really holding that space with whenua and Tāngata. So being Māori, being an urban Māori, and only now starting to explore the other parts of my whakapapa, what's holding me and what supports and nurtures me in that space is find safe spaces to be a new Māori effectively, and it's new Māori, yeah. And it is as if
coming out.
Yeah,
You come out as Plex. You come out as Māori sometimes, particularly when you're born to life.
Yeah, totally. And having safe spaces. So again, this is a semi-pitch for to acknowledge the mahi of Cate, is that her Cate Rachelle and Lou in terms of whanake is a space that I bumped into again in the past 4 or 5 years. I was working in a kaupapa Māori mental health space, and that was helping to feed me a bit, but that was my work. But then to actually reconnect into a space which was acknowledging that we are urban Māori, and what was holding me in that space really is about the relational aspects of that space. I could bring who I was, and we could explore it together, and we could journey together on this. Acknowledging our own individual expertise and that we can bring into that space as well, which was really empowering, is to actually acknowledge, yes, you may not know your whakapapa through the number of generations. However, in my case, I understood what it felt like to grow up in a kaupapa Māori family that we didn't have the language attached to it, but we had the processes, which now my new language says, that's the tikanga. And I actually didn't realise I had tikanga, but then I could come into a space, practice that, and I recognise that, that's my tikanga. And it was about the relationship. So I think for me as a new person, new Māori coming into that space is, creating those safe spaces for someone to explore it. And it's not, we all know that. We all know when we actually feel connected to a space, we want to stay there and flourish. So yeah, I don't know if that's helped.
I'll just have a talk to that. Was beautiful, and I'm not going to steal that, mana. That's amazing. However, what I would say, with all my pōtai on, and I can get my names with me always, those who are in an urban Māori do have the gene pool. It's just it's just where they are in the journey. But what it combines to on the ground for clinicians is there's some trauma, whether it's intergenerational or a spinal cord or a health condition. What is good for Māori, our Indigenous knowledge that I shared with you from my names, is good for all. And so, yes, there will be times, but as clinicians in that 10-minute, you might not, or 15, or however long you get to have, you probably might not be able to bridge the gap, but you can be mana enhancing, and you can ask the question, what do you need? Because I know on my journey of coming out Māori, that I still cannot hold on to the language. I can never have changed my skin colour or my eye colour, but my nans gave me values, and those values I couldn't label to the last decade. However, had you asked me 20 years ago when I was diagnosed, I needed something different. I just didn't know that that was a Māori Indigenous way, and yet people and clinicians in my waka were giving me that. They knew my husband's name, I knew how to get hold of them, they'd visit me if I was an inpatient, and they always treated me with respect in the outpatient. So yeah, I don't think that's inherently Māori. I think that was just being a good clinician, or good human, not even a clinician, a good human based on Indigenous knowledge. Yeah.
I was going to just have a go at answering that question myself.
Go.
In two ways. One way was have a lot more Māori health workers.
Right.
Our pool here is really small, and generally it's really small. And the other one was recently having done this with a man in his 80s. And the process was many of the things affirming that you guys have talked about, but also making sure I encouraged the stories to be told.
Aye.
And he made his own links, and these links were multi-generational. And then picking out the key bits and introducing that to the MDT, the multidisciplinary team, and they found their own links. And then shutting up and keeping out of the way, basically, So I think any of us can do that, especially if we are really open to the types of models you've displayed.
Two Māori concept was the whakaaro and the pūrākau. Again, we have whakapapa, which is who we bring, but the pūrākau is the stories. Often people think now like the atua really way back, but we all bring a pūrākau to the table, and I think that's what you've been able to do with that gentleman. And then the whakaaro, the idea that things could be different, or we can connect those whakaaro with our pūrākau and our whakapapa is a really powerful, thing.
And what holds that whole process, and like you're alluding to as well, it sits within the pōwhiri model. That is, we know it as mihi mihi. So mihi mihi being introductions in a real basic term, that actually it gives space so we can hear people's stories. And then from those stories, that's why in terms of Te Ao Māori, the Māori world, we don't start with my name. That's irrelevant at that point, because you need to know who I have come from. And I've just literally had that conversation with a colleague this morning, is actually, if you need to and you want to, you can go right back to kore, the very, very beginning. And with that understanding of if you have the understanding that the person I'm talking to, their whakapapa intimately connects back to the land, this is another reason why that will help to give space, hopefully, to understanding the trauma that may have occurred, why Māori potentiate those stats because of past traumas, and understanding the connection. So yeah, kia ora, that's
There were tears in those stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, through the ngāpai, through the heart.
In training we used to call that rapport, but now it's actually deeper than that, and holding space. I don't know if I said that, I think you all hold space, and we all hold space, and taking that time is, that's it in practice. That's what we came for. Good tips to practice. Oh, kia ora.
Okay. Very powerful presentation. My waka is sales are getting pretty thin, pretty worn, and the old boat's got a few leaks in it. But I've always believed in self-responsibility. What do you do when you want to invite those clinicians onto your waka to take a special place in your life, but they come across as arrogant and rude, and basically what you want to do is kick them off your waka and throw them into the sea. And I'm just wondering, under the philosophy that you have described, do you have any advice?
I'm just thought if we moved around here, then people around the corner could see without getting in the.
Kia ora, Richard, a great question, and in fact I've just been immersed in much of this korero around the country with a couple of ministers you may know. One's called Jacinda and the other's called Pena Henare. And we said sometimes we're force-fed to the people that get into our waka. And so Penny actually and I had a really quick korero about the All Blacks. And what happens in the All Blacks team, if you're not performing, that they have the option to kick them off. But for some reason, as patients and consumers, we get really whakamara about choosing better players. And sometimes benching some of those players is a good idea because you might get a better one, but it gives you space to maybe even go and dock and get those sales fixed up. I think in Aotearoa we're too quick and to wake up from an op, see someone at the end and think that they are the person for our waka. And I know that we talked to our korero is about the ageing process as well. It may be that there are different people out there that we can put into the waka and be brave to do that. But the second challenge for Aotearoa is going back to this lovely Tane's statement was we don't have enough capacity and capability sometimes to replace that. However, the All Blacks would probably have a bye if they didn't think they could front a team, and that would mean that we couldn't live well. So it's a big debate happening around Aotearoa at the moment, particularly in the Māori space. So I don't know if that answers back to your individual waka, but I would say we have to be brave to do research and seek that out, but then inequity can occur too if we can't afford it, or there's nobody in our region, or there's no one within our funded DHB, and we know there's a great one in another region. So yeah, it's a good korero to continue.
Can I raise the issue that maybe as clinicians, if we're sensing that someone is, that our relationship with the client has changed, that we are brave enough and courageous enough to say, how can I help you find someone else who's going to better meet your needs? That we initiate that conversation, because whether we like it or not, we're in a very powerful position, and people are afraid they're going to lose access if they say, I'm not happy. So maybe we need to be put down our own defences and our own insecurities and offer people the opportunity to support them to find someone else.
I was just going to sum that up, because also if the All Blacks model or the waka model, we don't want to go off course, and there's a systemic challenge here in Aotearoa where if you do choose to change teams or you ask someone to leave your waka and you carry on paddling, great, that there's a black mark by your name, or there's notes that say warning or troublemaker, or I've had the more antagonist, be careful, take 2 people in the room with you, where really it was a relationship breakdown really early in the pōwhiri process. So
Yeah, and you're getting lots of different answers. Hopefully they all kind of connect. I can remember sitting into with a korero from Tā Mason jury, and he described. I wish I had a big pen. I'm a drawer, but he described these 2 triangles. He just described 2 triangles. So one here was a Western perspective, and at the top he had respect. Down here on one side it was power, and the other side was authority. So potentially just by what's the deferred position that unfortunately clinicians, doctors, and so forth may sit in this system, it looks like actually I have a bit more power in this space than the person that I'm talking to, where because of my position, that just it's sort of this unwritten rule of we must respect our professionals as such. But what he was also offering up was understanding on this other triangle, there's mana, there's authority, and then there's empowerment. With a different thinking around that is that actually, me as a clinician, well, actually what's occurring here is that you're showing me, you're giving me mana to be able to stand here, which it means is I'm empowered to give you something, my authority being my knowledge base and so forth. So I'm being empowered to hold that space. So being able to flick that model of the Western perspective, I hope that's okay to use that, to a Te Ao Māori perspective in the sense that actually I can't take mana. I've got to be given it in this point in place. So when I get given this mana, I can then go and be empowered to do what I need. However, what needs to occur, and this is kind of what we're alluding to, is actually there's a process of relationship building first. So then that we are introduced to the space, which is often, if you've been at a pōwhiri, you're going to have the seating for the visitors, you're going to have the seating for mana whenua. This space in between both those parties is called the ātea. And this space is a space where you're allowed to bring dialogue, any type of dialogue. It's got rules and it's regulated as such in that process. The idea of that is that if we can air what we need to air, we'll get to a common understanding. Common understanding might be that actually, oh geez, I don't like you. You're a dick, so I'm leaving. Yeah. Whereas it might be the common understanding, actually this is how I need you to behave in my space. You need to come to the common understanding is actually what we're talking about here, my tinana, it's my experience. So you need to come to me. This is my table, come and visit my table. And so that then, when you've gone through that whole process, you can then move to the House of Romo, which is another person who looks after that space, which means that we've come to the place where we can now do the work, where we're actually our everyday living. Yeah, I hope that wasn't too much of a rant.
Can you see why we'd like to do a half-day workshop?
Yeah.
So, sadly, that brings us to the end of your hour. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for your time.